Hi, welcome to Weekend Review, where we look at some of the news and the headlines, joined by a smaller but still stellar cast this week. We've got Meg Wingirter from the Dig team, Don Mecoy, the business editor. Let's get right to it. Meg, we've got a story coming out this week that's part of our State of Oklahoma coverage. This one focusing on infant mortality, another number that the state kind of has a shameful rating in. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, when it comes to the rate of infant mortality, which is the number of babies who were born alive but don't make it to through that first year of life, we're 47th, which is really not where you want to be. Unfortunately, we've got a lot of things working against babies and against moms. You know, the high uninsured rate is one of the big ones, because it means that even though you can get on sooner care once you're pregnant, women aren't getting care before conception that could take care of some of these risk factors, like, you know, if you're obese or you have high blood pressure or diabetes or whatever it might be. we
talk about the concerns too, and we talk about rates and ranking 47th, but there's a real number here. We're talking about between 300 and 400 children annually who pass away, who are born but pass away before the age of 1.
Yes.
Which is really kind of disturbing and shocking, just to think about that or whatever. There's also sort of, talk about the demographics involved here and who this proportionally falls harder on, these numbers.
Well, the rates are much worse for black babies than for white babies. There are some theories on why that might be. One of the most interesting ones is about the effect of chronic stress on black mothers, that basically over time it kind of chips away at the body, and that raises the risk then for babies being born prematurely or at a low birth weight. And one of the really interesting studies, this isn't Oklahoma specific, but you see the same pattern nationwide, is that women who immigrate from Europe, their daughters then tend to have healthier babies, the daughters who were raised in the United States and then have their own children. Those grandchildren of the European immigrants tend to be healthier. It's the opposite if a woman immigrates from Africa. Her daughter, who's raised in the United States, is then likely to have a less healthy baby, more likely to be at a low birth weight or premature, so that shows something is definitely going wrong.
And this is also an issue in the state that we have is, it's been a problem of access to prenatal care is another number that the state doesn't fare very well in. Obviously that's an issue here as well.
Yes.
Mothers who don't get the kind of attention from doctors, the kind of counseling about diet and all the kinds of things that are important to an expectant mother. A lot of that is absent, and that's another area where that the state is behind in. We have a lot of areas that we're trying to focus on, and one thing that we kind of continue to see is the interrelationship between so many of these problems. They are interconnected, and so getting to the root of a lot of the problems that confront Oklahoma, they are all related in many, many, many ways. So it just continues to be an ongoing theme in this project. All right, Don, let's talk to something else. Ongoing presence at Sandridge, Carl Icahn, a guy who's kind of become a thorn in their side.
He really has, and Sandridge has its own issues. You know, it just emerged from bankruptcy less than a year ago. They wiped out all of their shareholders at that point. They issued new stock, came out as a new company, and a lot of their creditors control their stock. Carl Icahn's their biggest shareholder, and he wants to install his own board of directors. And he has put up a list of candidates. He has issued repeated open letters to the current shareholders to try and get his candidates hired to run the company. He also says that, and Sandridge is looking at various things, whether to be bought out by somebody, whether to partner with somebody, and they're looking at different ideas for making the company survive. And he has said, if I'm successful at getting my board of directors in there, I might consider buying the company. Well, that appears to be a huge conflict of interest, because his board of directors is going to do what he wants them to do, and his offer may not be the best offer. So it's just been an almost daily occurrence of one side and the other issuing statements saying, you know, this is wrong. You need to do what we want to do. And Sandridge has conceded they're supporting 2 of his candidates for the board of directors, but they want others to be reelected so that they would still have a controlling you know, amount of directors on their board.
So even in this rebounding energy environment that we're in right now, kind of where prices are up and the companies seem to be generating more profits, Sandridge is still sort of in trouble?
They do. They have issues. I mean, most of their holdings are up in the Mississippian and northern Oklahoma, and there's oil there. Unfortunately, it's also the place that produces vast amounts of wastewater when you drill there. And because of our earthquake situation and the limits on companies how much of this wastewater they can dispose of, because the state has imposed these limits to try and reduce the amount of seismic activity that we've had, that it's an issue. It's a big issue for Sandridge. It's not, nobody's in a worse situation as far as wastewater than Sandridge is because of where their holdings are. But they do have value. I mean, there's assets, there's oil in the ground, proven resources there. So the company does have value. It's not worthless. And so they're looking for ways to, you know, make the company survive. And Carl Icahn, who's done this many times in the past, where he will take a big stake in a company and he will try to gain control and try to get all kinds of allowances, you know, issued to him. We've seen him do this time and time again. And Carl Icahn's he's very successful. He's a very wealthy man. And but essentially, Carl's in it for Carl. And pretty much, if he succeeds in what he wants to do, he's going to profit. And the people who are aligned with him may also profit, but they may not. You don't know what his timing's going to be as to when he gets in or out. So it's a really interesting situation, and it would be interesting to know. We don't really know what the other shareholders are going to do. Carl doesn't have a big enough stake that he can sort of push this through on his own. He's got to form alliances with these other shareholders, and we've got this shareholders meeting coming up in a little over a week.
And you mentioned that he's done this before in Oklahoma, and we talked briefly before about there was another famous Oklahoma company that he's been involved with.
Yeah, he did something similar to this when Kerr-McGee was here, and ironically Kerr-McGee that's where Sandridge is located now, the former Kerr-McGee Tower. Carl became an activist shareholder. Back then they were called corporate raiders. There was a different terminology, but he tried to extract all kinds of things from Kerr-McGee, and at one point they paid him a large amount of money kind of to leave them alone. I mean, that's not the way they wanted to characterize it, but that's what happened. And eventually, and Kerr-McGee was having some problems at the time, and eventually they were bought by Anadarko Petroleum for, I think, something like $18 billion. And Carl Icahn owned a lot of Kerr-McGee stock and sold at a big premium when Anadarko bought it, and he made a ton of money.
I missed the 80s. It was a good time.
Meg
wasn't born in the 80s.
That was actually the 90s, I think.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay. Meg was born in the 80s, and that was the 90s, so I'm wrong on both counts. That's not the kind of information we give you every day. Usually it's the correct information, so ignore me, listen to them. But check us out. We throw the paper in your driveway if you want it. You can catch us online every day, 365 days a year. Check us out. I think you'll like what you see there. We'll see you next week.